When I first heard Emily's cries outside my window, I thought it was a nightmare. But the moment I saw her small handprints smeared across the glass, I realized she wasn't just in the woods, she was trying to get inside. The first time I heard it, I thought I was dreaming. The night was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that makes you hear every tiny sound your house produces. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint crack of the wooden walls as they settle, even the low buzz of the streetlight outside. My eyelids were drooping, body just on the edge of slipping into sleep, when a sound cut through all of it. It wasn't sharp, not loud. It was faint, trembling, and yet it pierced straight into me like ice water. It was the sound of someone crying. Not just crying, it was the soft, broken sobs of a child, a little girl. At first I stayed perfectly still, clutching the blanket closer around me. My ears strained to make sure it wasn't my imagination. The sound came again, more definite this time, like a thin thread of sorrow carried on the night air. My heart began to beat harder, each thump echoing in my head. There was no reason a child should be out there, in the woods behind my house, not at this hour. I live far from town, and the nearest neighbors are a good 10 minutes away. My brain tried to offer explanations, an animal making a strange noise, a lost cat, maybe even the wind, but none of them fit. The sound was too human, too heartbreaking. I pulled myself up to sit, my body tense, eyes locked on the dark window across the room. The crying continued, distant yet oddly clear, as if whoever was making it was just on the edge of my yard. My mouth was dry, my throat tight, and I could feel every hair on my arm standing up. There was something wrong with the way it echoed. It didn't rise and fall naturally. It came in shivers, abrupt gasps between sobs, the kind that made you imagine the small chest of a child heaving in despair. Minutes passed, or maybe it was only seconds, before the crying stopped, just cut off, like someone flipped a switch. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat frozen, waiting for it to begin again, but the night remained still. That stillness weighed on me more than the sound itself, as if the absence of it was somehow worse. Finally, I forced myself to lie back down, staring at the ceiling, convincing myself it was nothing, that I had been half asleep, caught between a dream and waking life. I tried to close my eyes, but annoying unease wouldn't let me. I kept glancing at the window, my chest tight with the fear of seeing something I shouldn't. After a while, I pulled the blanket up to my chin, trying to hide in its warmth. My thoughts began to blur again, exhaustion fighting against fear, and I was almost asleep when I noticed something strange, a faint wet sound, like the squeak of a finger dragging across glass. My eyes snapped open. It was coming from the direction of my window. I didn't want to move, didn't want to look, but my body acted on its own, stiffly turning toward it. In the dim glow of the streetlight outside, I saw streaks across the glass. Long, uneven smears glistening with moisture, cutting through the fogged surface of the window. They weren't random either. They curved and spread in shapes too familiar. The marks looked like the prints of hands. Small hands pressed against the outside of my window, as though someone had stood there watching me. I felt the blood drain from my face as my heart pounded against my ribs. The hands were at the height of a child, low on the glass. Each mark distinct enough to show the lines where fingers had dragged downward. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as though the air had been sucked out of the room. My body begged me to get up, to check, to do something, but my fear pinned me like a weight. I lay there rigid, staring at the ghostly outlines, silently pleading for them to fade. But they didn't fade. They stayed there, wet and glistening, as if whoever left them had only just moved away. I listened, praying for silence, and when I heard nothing, no crying, no footsteps, no scratching, I realized the most terrifying thing of all. Whatever had stood at my window, it had been close enough to touch the glass, and I never heard it leave. The next night was worse because now I knew what to expect. I tried to go about my evening like normal, but every sound made me tense. I kept glancing at the window, avoiding it, yet drawn to it as though my eyes refused to let it out of sight for too long. I told myself the streaks of handprints could have been condensation, maybe even my imagination, but deep down I knew better. Those marks were real, and the thought of a child or something shaped like a child standing outside my bedroom window in the dead of night made my skin crawl. When midnight passed and nothing happened, I almost allowed myself to relax. The television hummed softly in the living room as I sat curled on the couch, too unsettled to go to bed. I muted the volume and listened. Silence. The woods outside were quiet, no wind, no rustling, just stillness. I thought maybe it had been a one-time thing, something I could push out of my head if I tried hard enough. But then it came again. The sound was unmistakable, so fragile it seemed like it would break apart in the air. The crying, this time it was closer, no longer distant or muffled. My entire body stiffened as I realized it was coming from directly outside. The sobs rose and fell, uneven, desperate, as though the little girl was standing right beneath my window, crying up into the night sky. I didn't move at first. I sat frozen on the couch, heart hammering, blood rushing in my ears. My instinct screamed at me to stay where I was, to keep still and not give myself away. I was terrified that if I shifted even slightly, whatever was outside would hear me. The crying grew louder, more broken, until I felt tears prickling in my own eyes from the sheer rawness of the sound. Minutes stretched unbearably. I pressed a hand against my mouth to silence my breathing. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the crying stopped. The silence that followed was thick, pressing down on me until it hurt. I wanted to believe it was over, but then came another sound, a dragging, scraping noise, long and slow, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. My skin crawled as I realized it was moving across the yard. Summoning every bit of nerve I had left, I crept toward the window, careful to keep myself low and in the shadows. I hesitated before peeling back the curtain just an inch, enough for me to peer outside. The yard stretched out under the cold wash of moonlight, the grass glistening faintly with dew. At first it looked empty, no child, no figure, nothing moving. I almost felt foolish for looking, but then my eyes drifted downward. The dirt directly beneath my window was disturbed. A trail cut across the yard, two deep lines carved into the soil, running side by side as though something or someone had been dragged. The trail stretched from the very spot beneath my window all the way toward the tree line at the back of my property. My breath caught as I followed it with my eyes to where it ended. Just before the woods began, resting half buried in the dirt, was a shoe. It was small, the kind a child would wear. Mud clung to its surface, and even in the faint light I could see it was worn, the sole peeling away from the fabric. I stared at it, my heart slamming harder and harder against my ribs, because deep down I already knew whose shoe it was. The same child who had been crying outside my house. The same one who had pressed her hands against my window. I let the curtain fall back into place, retreating into the center of the room where no shadows could reach me. My body was trembling uncontrollably, sweat prickling at my skin despite the cool air. I couldn't understand why she was here, what she wanted, or why she chose my house of all places. The thought kept circling in my mind, a terrible whisper I couldn't silence. If she was dragged into the woods, then who or what was dragging her? I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every brush of wind against the siding, I heard it all, convinced that at any second the crying would return, but it never did. The silence stretched on, unbroken, until the pale light of dawn crept across the walls. When I finally forced myself to look outside again, the trail was still there, cutting across my yard like an ugly scar, and the shoe was gone. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I couldn't. The words sat heavy on my tongue, but every time I imagined trying to explain it, I felt ridiculous. What would I even say? That I'd heard a child crying in the woods, that I'd found handprints on my window, that I'd seen a shoe in the dirt. It sounded insane, like something from a nightmare. But no matter how I tried to reason it away, the memory clung to me. The image of that tiny shoe wouldn't leave my mind. The next day was cloudy, the kind of gray sky that feels like it's pressing down on the earth. I couldn't focus on anything. I kept pacing the house, glancing toward the backyard every chance I got. That trail in the dirt lingered there like an accusation. I knew I shouldn't, but as the afternoon stretched on, my curiosity grew heavier than my fear. I needed to see where the trail led. By the time I finally stepped outside, the air was damp, the smell of wet leaves hanging over everything. My shoes sank slightly into the soft ground as I followed the marks across the yard. Each step I took made my chest tighter. The woods loomed ahead, dark even in daylight, and the trail pulled me straight into their mouth. The moment I entered the trees, the air changed. It was cooler, the light dimmer, and the silence oppressive. The usual chatter of birds was absent, as though the forest itself had gone still. My heart thudded louder with every step. The trail wound between the trunks, leading me deeper, and I followed, barely aware of how far I was going. After what felt like forever, I came to a small clearing. That's when I saw it. A patch of disturbed soil, darker and looser than the earth around it. A shallow pit, the kind you'd dig in a hurry. My stomach dropped as I froze in place. The dirt was uneven, clumped together, as though something had been buried there not long ago. My hands trembled as I wiped sweat from my forehead, my mind screaming at me to turn back. But then my eyes caught something sticking out from the soil, a small scrap of fabric, pink, torn and dirt-stained. I stared at it, bile rising in my throat, because it looked like it belonged to a child's dress. I couldn't make myself move closer. I couldn't touch it. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating, as though the forest itself was pressing against me, urging me to leave. I stumbled backward, my breath coming fast and shallow. The thought that something was buried there gnawed at me, but I couldn't bring myself to dig. I turned and hurried back the way I came, branches snapping under my feet, heart racing. Every second I expected to hear that crying again, echoing through the trees. But the woods remained silent. When I finally broke free into my yard, the sight of my house was almost a relief. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and leaned against it until my legs stopped shaking. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that I hadn't really seen what I thought I saw. But the image of that pink fabric burned in my mind. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my nerves frayed. For hours, nothing happened. No crying, no sounds from outside. My eyelids grew heavy, and just as I began to drift, I heard it again. But this time it was different. The crying wasn't outside. It wasn't distant. It was inside. The sound was faint at first, muffled as though it was seeping through the walls themselves. My breath hitched as I sat up, straining to hear. The sobs grew clearer, echoing through the house, impossible to place. My skin prickled with cold fear. It was the same sound as before, the same small broken gasps of a little girl. I pressed my ear against the wall, and my blood turned to ice. The crying was coming from within. Somewhere inside the walls of my house, a little girl was weeping. I pressed my ear against the wall, my skin clammy against the cold plaster. The crying was faint, muffled, but it was there clear enough that I couldn't mistake it for imagination. It wasn't drifting in from outside. It was echoing from within the walls, as if someone was trapped inside. Their sobs carried through the bones of the house. My stomach twisted as a wave of nausea surged through me. I staggered back, staring at the wall like it might split open at any second. The sound moved, drifting from one side of the room to the other, weaving in and out like the girl was crawling inside the very structure. I followed it with my ears, too terrified to step closer. Every sob was broken, trembling, the kind of sound that made my chest ache as if I was hearing real suffering. Yet there was something wrong, something unnatural about how it carried. No real child's voice should have been able to echo that way, stretching thin and then snapping sharp in the next second. I couldn't stay in my bedroom anymore. The walls pressed in on me, making it hard to breathe. I grabbed my phone for light, fled into the hallway, and turned on every lamp I could reach. The brightness offered no comfort. The crying didn't stop, it only shifted. Now it seemed to be coming from downstairs, seeping up through the floorboards beneath my feet. My chest tightened as I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into the dimness below. I told myself not to go, that I didn't need to follow it, but my feet betrayed me. Step by step I descended, the sobs growing louder with each creak of the stairs. By the time I reached the bottom, I was trembling so badly I had to grip the railing to steady myself. The sound was clearer now. It was coming from behind the basement door. I froze in front of it, every nerve in my body screaming for me to turn back. The thin wood of the door vibrated with the muffled cries, a rhythm of grief leaking into the hallway. My hand hovered over the knob, shaking violently. I didn't want to go down there. Every instinct begged me not to. But the sound was relentless, pulling me in with invisible strings. I opened the door. The basement was a yawning void at the bottom of the stairs. The air hit me at once, damp cold, heavy with the smell of earth. I clicked on the flashlight on my phone, the weak beam cutting through the dark. Dust floated in the air like ash, the shadows swallowing everything beyond the circle of light. I stepped onto the first stair, then the next, each one groaning beneath me. The crying grew sharper, closer, as though I was descending straight toward it. My breaths came fast, shallow, echoing in the suffocating silence between sobs. The light flickered, threatening to die, and I tightened my grip on the phone. By the time I reached the bottom, my legs felt like they could give out beneath me. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Small, wet, and bare, imprinted clearly across the concrete floor. The prints shone faintly in the beam of my light, glistening as though they had been left just moments before. My throat constricted as I followed them with trembling eyes. They trailed across the floor, one after another, each step deliberate, leading me deeper into the shadows. I forced myself to raise the light higher, scanning the basement. The footprints ended at the far wall. At first it looked solid, nothing out of the ordinary, but as I inched closer, my stomach dropped. The wall wasn't whole. A jagged crack split the foundation wide enough that I could see into the darkness beyond. The sobbing was pouring from that opening, rising and falling in the pitch black, like the girl was sitting just on the other side, waiting. My arm shook as I lifted the light toward the crack, the beam barely penetrating its depths. My skin burned with dread, every instinct urging me to turn back, to run, but I couldn't look away. My heart slammed against my ribs as something shifted inside. A shape, small, pale, dirt-streaked. Then it reached out. From the darkness, a hand slid through the crack, thin and fragile, its skin caked with soil. The fingers stretched, curling slightly, groping against the wall as though searching for me. My breath hitched in my throat, frozen, and in that moment I realized the crying had stopped. The silence was worse than any sound. The hand was still moving, still reaching, even though no voice came with it. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone, the beam of light shaking wildly across the basement walls. But the hand didn't retreat. It stayed there, stretching further, as if it knew I was there, as if it wanted me to take it. I bolted up the stairs, 2 at a time, my chest heaving as I slammed the basement door shut behind me. My palms pressed flat against the wood, as if my weight alone could keep whatever was down there from following. The silence on the other side was unbearable. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear, but there was nothing. No crying, no movement, just silence so thick it made the hair on the back of my neck rise. My body shook violently as I slid down to the floor, every muscle trembling. My heartbeat throbbed painfully in my ears, drowning out the world. I stayed there until the first hints of dawn crept through the curtains, the faint light softening the shadows that had tormented me all night. Forcing myself to my feet, I staggered through the house. Every corner seemed wrong. Every reflection in the dark windows looked like it was hiding something. I told myself that once the sun was high, I would check the basement again, if only to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. When I finally dared to return downstairs, the air felt different. Not heavy, not cold, just ordinary. The footprints on the concrete floor were gone. The crack in the wall was still there, but it looked impossibly small in daylight. Just a hairline fracture that couldn't have hidden so much as a mouse, let alone a crying child. My pulse quickened as I stared at it. Had I imagined everything? My phone had no photos, no evidence. It was like the night had swallowed every trace of what I'd seen. I tried to move on with my day, but the memory clung to me. My thoughts kept circling back to that hand reaching through the crack, the way the crying had stopped so suddenly, as if it knew I was listening. I told myself I'd imagined it, that my exhaustion had played tricks on me, but deep down I didn't believe it. I couldn't. That night, for the first time in days, the crying didn't come. The silence stretched endlessly, and I almost convinced myself that whatever had haunted me was gone. Relief settled into my chest, heavy but comforting. I even managed to fall asleep, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep I hadn't felt in what felt like forever. But when I woke up, something was wrong. My sheets were damp, clinging to my skin. The smell hit me immediately, damp earth, strong and suffocating, filling my lungs with its rot. I sat up in shock, my eyes darting around the room, my heart climbing into my throat. That's when I saw it. At the foot of my bed lay the small pink shoe, the same one I had seen in the dirt outside, caked with mud, its fabric torn and stained. I froze, staring at it, my body unable to move. My mind screamed questions, but no answers came. My bedroom door was still locked from the inside. No one could have come in. And yet the shoe was there, resting in the shadows at the edge of my bed like an offering, or a warning. The silence pressed in on me until I couldn't take it anymore. I reached out, slowly, hesitantly, toward the shoe. My fingers hovered inches away when I heard it. A sound so soft I almost thought I imagined it. Sobbing. It wasn't outside. It wasn't in the walls. It wasn't in the basement. It was under me. The faint, broken sobs of a little girl were coming from beneath the mattress. My body locked in place, my hands still hovering in the air. The bed frame creaked ever so slightly, the sound of the crying vibrating through the mattress like a heartbeat. I wanted to run, to fling myself from the room, but I couldn't move. Every muscle was frozen as the sobbing grew louder, more desperate, filling the small space between the mattress and the floor. The sheets grew wetter, the smell of earth thicker, until it felt like I was buried alive with her. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it any longer, I felt a small hand pressed up against my back from beneath the mattress, cold and damp, fingers spreading wide against my skin through the thin fabric of my shirt. I gasped, every nerve in my body screaming, but I didn't dare move. The crying stopped instantly. The silence returned, absolute and suffocating. I don't know how long I lay there, frozen, waiting. I daren't know if I'll ever find the courage to lift the mattress and see what's beneath. All I know is that she's still there, and now she knows I can hear her.